very much, Hans-Ulrich, for that introduction, and thank you also for inviting me today and inviting myself and Eleanor to help in selecting work for the archive, which comes from our contribution from the Cedric Price Estate, which also complements the work from the CCA archive, which I will talk a tiny bit about. I have a big pieces of paper, but I will be very brief. But I did want to mainly thank Hans-Ulrich and Lorenza Buccarelli for being spectacular, and to the CCA for looking after Cedric's work so fantastically, and to the Architectural Association, who will be publishing the book that I'm now writing with the CCA. But it won't be out till the winter. But most importantly, I should thank Eleanor Bron and David Price, David and Christine Price, who have supported all of the work and the research for the book to date. So without them, none of this work would be happening. I didn't have a title for this very short talk, but I now have a title. And it came from having seen the exhibition now, or the Pavilion, and it is called Knowing When You Are Sufficiently Incomplete. And that was a phrase that Cedric used. He said, you must know when you are sufficiently incomplete, the moment when you become sufficiently incomplete, which is when your own expertise and your own understanding comes to a stop and you need somebody else, you need other people to work on what you're working. So I think this pavilion embodies that idea very eloquently. It needs everybody that is coming to the pavilion to add to it. Probably not complete it, but add to it. I had the great good fortune of spending time in the company of Cedric. He was a remarkable man. My first encounter was as a student at the AA, and latterly worked, as Hans-Ulrich mentioned, on various paper projects, from books to paper cups. In the year 2000, I was preparing the content for a book called Cedric Price Opera, which is a small grey book, which might be kicking about somewhere. Cedric had finally agreed, after much resistance, to making the book. He said that making books was about as slow as making buildings, so he wasn't really interested in that. So he asked me for one good reason why it should be done, why we should make a book. And so I argued that it was not fair to keep all the work to himself. It should really be seen by students if it's useful at all. And at which point he promptly pulled out from his desk drawer a contents list. So he'd been thinking about it already. He then proceeded to give me free rein of all the other drawers and files, and that was Cedric. He was very trusting and very generous, which I will explain more later. He was fundamentally interested to see what you would bring to the table, not what he could tell you. So I sat upstairs in the top floor of his office, which was called the White Room, and sometimes it was called East Grinstead. Maybe someone else will tell you the story of that. I won't go into it now. And I pored over the drawings. It was like a 10,000, 100,000 piece puzzle. And at the end of each day, I would wash my hands because they were covered in charcoal and pencil and the powder of photocopy ink, and sometimes a bit of cigar ash. It was pressed into the paper, and it was a happy time. And it was a somewhat proto-Dickensian setup. Later that year, I shall battle on. Later that year, or early the next, the CCA came, and they arrived to remove all of the work from the office. The entire contents of the office was removed in 2 shipments, minus the 1960s pinball machine and the legendary fax machine, which was bought for Cedric by Joan Littlewood, and which he resolutely refused to use. except for one use only, which was to send instructions to his brother for making models. Absolutely wasn't to be used for any other purpose. The archivists, Howard and Camille, came in. They wore white coats, gloves, and masks. And they gingerly and methodically lifted notes and papers, as you might an Egyptian artifact or a deadly poisonous substance. Almost 10 years later, it's you, Cedric. I think it's Cedric. Almost 10 years later, Cedric gone, now occupied with the business, as he would put it, of pushing up the daisies, I was fortunate again in going to visit the CCA. I looked online at the archive. That's how you can look at the archive, is you go online and you look at a list. And you look at a list of numbers, lots and lots of numbers. And I picked a number, any number, and they become more obvious when you become more initiated. But I took any number, and sometime later came up a crisp, clean, beige folder, like the ones in the other room. And I opened it up, and now wearing the obligatory white gloves, I looked to see what I got. But before I saw anything, the most wonderful knockout waft of cigar smoke came drifting out. So all was well. So architectural historians can and will argue for the coming centuries over the quality and intent of Cedric's drawings, about his desire to build, about his unfathomably paradoxical nature, so puzzling and improbable at times that we are not quite sure whether he's not just a marvelous figment of our imagination. Well, hell no. You have to smell the drawings to know that he was the real deal. On those previous 2 points, I'm with Eleanor. I think Eleanor Bron, she argued a case very eloquently yesterday about Cedric's desire to build, or the question of whether he wanted to build. I would go further to argue that without question, his love for drawing and how beautifully he drew. I quote, "His drawings always extend the prose, even when it was his own, rather than merely clarifying it. Never using 2 lines when one would do, the mere addition of 2 dots, eye pupils, could introduce a whole range of human reflexes in an otherwise natural pudding face." This was actually Cedric writing about his friend and cartoonist and someone he admired greatly, Nicholas Bentley. It was Cedric's father Father A.J. Price, who taught his children to draw. He taught them how to use watercolor, to sketch, and work over the top of construction drawings that he himself would bring home from the office. His father was an architect also. And being an architect, he sent Cedric and his siblings, his younger brother and elder sister, out on errands. And one day he sent Cedric off, at probably about the age of 15, to survey a house in the nearby town. He grew up in Stone in Staffordshire. So it would have been probably a Victorian working men's terraced house in the heart of the industrial Midlands in England, and the conditions were very basic, hygiene virtually non-existent. So Cedric very dutifully carried out the task. He came home clutching his drawings, but scratching like mad all over, like this. And of course, AJ knew what he'd put his son through. To his much amusement of his brother and his sister, Cedric had come home covered in fleas. But so Cedric did want to be an architect from a very young age. I would say so. As you'll find in some of the examples selected here by Mirko Zardini from the CCA's archive and by Eleanor and myself in the estate archive, each project is exercised through a distinct hierarchy of drawing types, devised to reflect that practice. In-head drawings, what Cedric called in-head drawings, were quick-witted cartoon annotations in pocket-sized notebooks, so you'll see little reproductions of drawings. And they were then the catalyst for in-house drawings, developed in more detail in the office, which then accumulated into in-forward-minded retrospective drawings, which were collages and diagrams produced mainly for publication and often revised and annotated with self-critical afterthoughts. Cedric always criticized his own work, and very publicly. The use and the tangible beauty of the first and last types, the in-head and the in-forward-minded retrospective drawings, are in their quite deliberate incompleteness. Each one raises a question and demands that the thought be rethought and rethought. Their generosity, or to use possibly a more fashionable word, their legacy, is in the economy of the line. I'm nearly done, for those who are flashing 5 minutes. I'm sorry. I'm just going to say the two most frequently asked questions that I'm asked about Cedric are, one, how did he make a living? And two, have you come across any surprises in the archive? The answer to the first is simple. He made a living as a self-styled architect who was engaged in some capacity in over 250 projects over 40 years. He was a prolific lecturer, correspondent, consultant, and client confidant. His qualification for such a role were his Cambridge degree and an AA diploma, and an exceptional curiosity, kindness, and wit that was rewarded by some fantastically good friends. The answer to the second is yes, there are many surprises, including some letters from his friend Buckminster Fuller, specifically a detailed critique of the new aviary at London Zoo, which is both acerbic and very funny. But overwhelmingly, the surprise which I now find I much better appreciate is how incredibly hard Cedric worked to challenge all preconceptions of the moment in which he worked by knowing his period of time so well and from so many points of view. He studied the nature of politics, of culture, of architecture, of construction, of technology, the nature of nature, and human nature. He was often called a visionary, but this is a misplaced term. He was an independently minded realist, highly principled, and with a magnanimous spirit. It doesn't sound as catchy, but I think it is a more accurate description, and perhaps the part that architecture as a discipline chooses to entirely overlook. My very last little story is that Cedric was invited to participate in the Venice Biennale in the year 2000 under the title Less Aesthetics, More Ethics. He did make a proposal called Venice, but then he declined the invitation, which I have to say wholly fulfilled, in his declining, wholly fulfilled the year's brief. His reason for not exhibiting in the end, and I quote, this was his letter, is that there are several architects who have been invited with whom I share nothing in common and with whom I do not wish to exhibit. I will not dare to think that given your offering, Hans Ulrich, that he would have felt a good deal more inspired to show up this time. But I guess we have to dare to think. Thank you.